So, I was an avid reader in high school, and mainly the books I read were from the school library. So, there was this whole library of books, and what do I read? Mostly Melody Carlson books. But there were plenty of books in that library that I remembered being in the library, but didn't decide to try them until afterwards, until this reading in this time. So yeah, today we're going to talk about the books I've read that I remember being in the school library and what I think of them now. So yeah, we're going to talk about those. And I know in a lot of these videos lately, I usually also try to talk about, like, I do a little content review for it. I only really talk much about the content if I can remember much of it, which I don't for a lot of these books, but if I remember something, I'll be sure to mention it. I think most of these are fine for content, so yeah. Alright, so let's get into it. So the first book I read that I remembered being in the school library was Pretense by Lori Wick. So this was the first one I tried, because I literally tried reading this one immediately after high school, because it was also in my church's library. So I first tried it summer 2022, and I think I got about 10 or 11 chapters in. Yeah, it's important to note this for all the talk about this movie. This book is 700 pages. So yeah, I got 10 or 11 chapters in, and then I realized there's no way I'm gonna finish this summer. So I gave it back, but then I picked it up again in summer 2023 and just started where I left off and read from there. So yeah, with my full thoughts on it when I first finished it, as I was not quite aware of my need to be drawn in, so I was kind of just like, it's okay. So yeah, there's that. But then, of course, I realized later that the main reason of me thinking it was just okay is because of my need to be drawn in. So I decided to reread it once I got out of that. So I reread it last year, and again, so this is 700 pages, and when I read it for when I read it last year, I reread the whole thing in 9 days. Yeah, at least according to my Goodreads. So I read it all in 9 days because I had made a playlist for this book, and I was also trying to keep notes of what songs would be good to listen to then, which I have the playlist public on my account, and there's also like an unlisted video of the guide to the playlist that I made, so check that out. So it was enjoyable because to read it all in 9 days because of the playlist and finally getting to hear some of these songs, because some of the songs I would look up the lyrics but not listen to them. So that was pretty fun. Because of that, some days I was so the goal for this reread was to read like 100 pages each day. But there were some days I read more than 100 pages because I was trying to get to a point in the book where a certain song would play. There is that. So my full thoughts. I think for the second time reading it, I think on Goodreads I gave it 3.5 to 3.75. I never quite settled on an exact rating. That was because, like, most of the book was good, but even the second time around, I still didn't care for the last 25%. Because to me, the second time, it felt like a glorified epilogue. Like, it didn't seem as necessary. So because I read this a little bit more recently than some of the books we're going to talk about next, I do remember a bit of the content. So there is a scene where there's a bit of a sex talk with the mom to her two girls, but yeah, there's nothing really graphic about that, so there's that. Not really any details about that. And then there is a bit of a romance, but there wasn't that much in the romance content, so yeah, this is fine. So yeah, the next the next thing to talk about for the books that I read later was finishing series that I started in high school but didn't read more until later, and those series are the Refiner's Fire series by Lynn Austen and the Tales of Goldstone Wood series by Elisabeth Stengl. So yeah, like like I said, so I read the first two books in high school. So the first book in The Refiner's Fire, Candle in the Darkness. I read this one because it was recommended to me by a friend, and there are a few moments while reading it where I was like, why did you recommend this book to me? But I think overall, from what I remember, I think it was a good book. So yeah, there's that. And then Heartless, the first book of the Tales of Goldstone Wood series, I did not care for. I didn't like the guy who would become the main girl's love interest, although I figured they would get together after the first three chapters. So yeah, there's that. And I remember with that book, I liked more of the first half where it was royalty relationship drama. But then the second half where there's more action fantasy stuff, I was not into as much. So yeah, there's that. So I talked in that those were not the orders that I read those books in high school, but I'm going to talk about from now on the order that I read the rest of each of the series. So we're going to talk about the Refiner's Fire series first. So the second book in that series is Fire by Night, and I don't know how many times I've mentioned it, but it should be known I did not like this second book. Can't really talk about why without giving spoilers, but there is an upcoming video where I'll talk about more of my problems and get into the spoilers, and yeah, so stay tuned for that. So yeah, I found it to be legitimately problematic. So yeah, there's that. And then the third book, A Light to My Path. This one, I found it again, didn't like it mainly because I needed to be drawn in, but it was better than Fire by Night, but like everything's better than Fire by Night. There's that. The one thing about A Light to My Path, there's a moment where I don't know if I've mentioned this before on my channel, but I want to mention it right now. There's a moment in A Light to My Path that was kind of funny to me. I don't know if it'll be funny to anyone else, but so one of the characters that we're following in Light to My Path is a slave who is in charge of this slave owner's daughter, and there's one scene where the mom is talking to the daughter and she's saying like, hey, this guy wants to marry you, and then the daughter's like, ew, no, he's old enough to be my dad, and then the mom says he has money, and then the girl was like, sign me up. Then again, that was quite a paraphrase. I forgot to mention that before I quoted that, but that was kind of like, oh, that's I don't know why that's so funny to me. So yeah, there's that. And then with the Tales of Goldstone Wood series, so yeah, I didn't quite finish the series, but I read three other books in that series. The first one was Veiled Rose. So this one, I had to put it down because I was trying to read a book a week for a time, so I had to put it down for a bit because I was getting through it very slowly. But then I picked it up again for my first swapping screen time for reading video, and somehow I finished it all in the short amount of time. So that was good. I ended up giving it 3 stars. Yeah, probably should have been closer to a 2.75 because I needed to be drawn in. And then next I read Moonblood. I remember I gave this 2 stars, but I often think lately, like, I'm not sure if that's justified. I don't know if it was really that bad. It's just, yeah. And then the last, the book, the fourth book in this series, which was as far as I got, Starflower. So this one I initially put down because I don't know, I was behind in my reading schedule. But then I picked it up again last year. Yeah, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it more than I probably would have with I probably enjoyed it more than I would have if I still needed to be drawn in. So there was that. Still not sure if I'm going to continue on with the series, but I guess we shall see. Alright, I should have mentioned earlier, there were some Melody Carlson books that I've read later that I knew were in the library, but I didn't read at the time, that I will talk about in this, so we should have mentioned that. So so on that note, the next book I read was My Name is Chloe by Melody Carlson. So this is a part of the Diary of a Teenage Girl series where there's 4 different girls that are being followed, but the series is all one after the other. Although I think with this one, I think you're supposed to read the Chloe books in between the 4th and 5th Caitlin book, which I did not do. But so yeah, but I read this first book. I think I enjoyed it well enough. I mean, still not as much because I need to be drawn in. I like that it seems like the Diary of a Teenage Girl books have a bit of a different vibe than the other Melody Carlson books, which I liked. So yeah, there's that. And I think this one is fine for content. I should have mentioned that, like the books I just talked about, like the books in the Refiner's Finder and Tales of Goldstone Woods series, those are also fine for content. I think Starflower, because I read it in the time where I was talking about content in my reviews, I think I would have addressed it in that video. So yeah. The next books I read was the Christy Miller series by Robin Jones Gunn. So while I have read all of the Christy Miller collections now, I don't consider me having finished the series yet, although the point that I plan to get you to is probably not it's probably not going to be quite finished, but yeah, so I don't consider myself done, but I have read all the collections. So the first collection, I liked it well enough. This is relatively summary and like all these things, so that was nice. The second collection, I didn't really care for. Yeah, but that might have been just more like me problems. And then the third collection, which, yeah, I hold up. This is the only one of the collections that I own. This one, I really enjoyed this one, mainly because of Katie. She is fun to read about. So yeah, enjoyed this one. It might be my favorite of the collections. And then I read the fourth collection, which this one got the highest rating of any of the books, which was 3.5, but this is because it was an emotional roller coaster. Uh, so, so yeah, there's all that. This series is fine for content, and there's nothing else more to say. The next book I read that was in the school library is Keep Holding On by Susane Colasanti. I really enjoyed this one. I read it in 2024, and it ended up being on my top 5 of the year, so that was good. I really enjoyed that one. The thing that I'm not quite sure about now is like content. I remember there being a small part that I felt the need to skip over, but because it's like barely a paragraph, I don't think it was something to be of concern. But in looking up other Susane Colasanti books, doing research on them, it seems like those have content problems, so I don't really know. This one might have been fine, but I don't really know. Another Melody Carlson series I read later, although started the series, didn't finish them, probably won't finish them, and that's the On the Runway series. So the first and second book being Premiere and Catwalk. So I thought the first book Premiere, I thought it was fun enough, although I ended up giving it 2.75 because I didn't really need to be drawn in. But I did remember, even though I wasn't drawn in, I did remember that it was kind of fun and nostalgic. So yeah, there was that. But the second book, Catwalk, I did not care for. Yeah, I've talked about in other videos that I don't really care for it. Yeah, I think as far as I've gotten this series was okay for content. Yeah, don't know what else to say. Alright, then we got my one and only DNF for this video, and that is the book Paper Moon by Linda Windsor. I just didn't think this book was that good. So this is the first in a trilogy, and I planned on reading the whole trilogy, but I couldn't even make it through this book. So yeah, I don't even know if I got to chapter 10, but yeah, I did not get very far. I didn't like the way the third person narrative was done, though I will note that the kind of third person narrative that it was, I'm not bothered by it now, but I was bothered it at this point in time. And also just the vibes of it was like not that fun. So yeah, I have it noted in my document with all my TBR. I said DNF was a slight chance I could pick it up again, although it's getting out of my need to be drawn in to really like it, and also not being bothered by this kind of third person anymore. That chance is becoming less slight, but I may just never bother to pick it up again. So I guess we'll see. The next book I read was Pink by Marilynn Griffith. Is that how we say it? Griffith? Griffith. I don't. That's okay. So, yeah, I started. This was the first book I read in 2025. And because I was so focused on doing the reading vlogs and didn't think I'd have time for more recent reads, I didn't talk about it at the time that I read it on my channel. So, yeah, I think don't have much to say on this one. I think the main thing was I needed to be drawn in, and I was drawn in at the end, so that ended up bumping it up to a 3-star. So, yeah, I think I'm gonna also try the second book in the series to see. Something I remember, there's something about the writing of it that made it not quite good, but I'm not sure if I can really put into words what it was. I guess we'll find out whenever I read the second book. So yeah, and this one was fine for content. So yeah. Alright, another Melody Carlson series, and the last one to talk about. I'm struggling because I just remembered there was another Melody Carlson book I've read later, but I don't that I think might have been in the school library, but don't remember. That was Never Been Kissed. I'm not gonna talk about it too much because it wasn't a part of the plan. So yeah, I read that one. But now let's talk about the series that I wanted to talk about for this video is the TrueColors series by Melody Carlson. So actually in high school I did read one book in the series, the 10th book, Bright Purple. But I didn't read anything else, so I guess you could say this is a book that continue the rest of the series later. And I'm not quite finished the series yet. I still have the last few books to read, and I'm thinking for this series that whenever I do finish it, that I'm gonna be doing a ranking video for like my favorite and least favorite. So my favorite and least favorite of the series that I've read so far. So my least favorite so far is Burnt Orange, and my favorite so far is Pitch Black. So yeah, there's that. And so again, so I read this series relatively recently, so I'll link the videos where I talked about that for more of the content reviews on the books that I've read so far. Alright, the next book I read that was in the library, in the school library, is True to You by Becky Wade, my first book by this author. And this was, in terms of writing, this was a very solid, good Christian fiction book. The writing was pretty great, and the story, how the story played out was really good. There was good faith content. Despite the book being called True to You, there was nothing in the faith content that made me theologically cringe, so that's always good. But then there's some not great elements as well. So the main one is the not so great seeming emotional cheating element, and this one's tough to talk about, kind of describe, because I would say, like, technically they didn't do anything wrong while the guy was still in a relationship, because even on the trip they took together, like, it was a business trip. So, yeah, there's that, but still, I mean, not quite as great. Now, I wasn't as bothered by this as I maybe normally would have been because I knew about it before reading this book, and oftentimes when I find out about an element that I normally don't like in a book before reading it, then when I read it I'm not as bothered by it as I would have been if I didn't know about it. So there's that, but doesn't justify it, but like, I don't know. And then another surprising element that was little things for content for this book, there is some like one or two innuendos, and one that to me seemed to be a sexual reference, which, I mean, it wasn't as bad as it could have been, but I was surprised that that kind of stuff would be in a Christian fiction book. So yeah, there's that. So when I read this, I ended up giving it 3.5 stars, and not by how I rate 3.5 stars now. This is more that I had to knock down a star because of problems. So, or knock down half a star because of problems. So, yeah. All right. The next book I read that was in the school library is Real Not Perfect by Stephanie Coleman. So I actually heard about this series because of the library, and how I got to reading it again as I looked on Goodreads and I saw these books and I was like, wait, this looks familiar. And I was like, oh, yes. And fair warning, I will probably not shut up about this book this year because I loved it so much. A bunch of little things that are mentioned in this book I loved so much. And yeah, characters and like all these things. And the message, even though it's kind of cliche, I feel like it's still a message that's needed. So yeah, I'm looking forward to reading the rest of the series. It might be a while till I read the rest of the series, just on account of me planning my TBR way in advance. But yeah, I'm looking forward to the rest of the series whenever I get around to it. So yeah, and this one was fine for content. Nothing. I think there's like mention of a sex talk, but no details of that at all. And yeah, there's not even really much of a romance. So yeah, as much as I would have loved to end this video on that note, there's another book that I've read that was in the school library that I forgot to include on this list. So, yeah, and that is the book I'd Tell You I Love You, but Then I'd Have to Kill You by Allie Carter. So yeah, I read this earlier this year. It was fun enough. I liked it well enough. Certainly not spectacular, but it was fun. For content, there was an implied B word, and then also talk of mooning, but other than that, nothing else that really I would note. So yeah, so that is all for this video. Not a conventional type of video, but I hope you guys still enjoyed it. So that is all. Goodbye!